She should have stayed home and minded her business. Old ladies with soup pots don't belong on city streets. I pay taxes, I own property. She was creating a public nuisance, and honestly, good riddance. Those words came from a man standing in my courtroom in a three-piece suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He said them out loud, in front of me, in front of everyone, and he smiled while he said them. My name is Judge Frank Caprio. I have been sitting on this bench in Providence Municipal Court for more than 30 years. I have seen arrogance walk through that door in many shapes and sizes. But what I witnessed that Tuesday morning in the spring of 2026 was something that made even my most seasoned courtroom officers go quiet. This was not a case about soup. This was not a case about city ordinances or public property rules. This case was about who we decide matters in this society, and whether a badge, a briefcase, or a bank account gives certain people the right to decide that some lives are worth less than others. If you believe justice should be equal for every single person, rich, poor, young, old, housed, or homeless, then stay right here. Because what happens next in this courtroom is something you are going to want to witness. Let me take you back to where it all began. Bailiff Raymond Okafor stepped forward and read the case in a clear, steady voice. Case number 2026 MC00714. The City versus Mrs. Eleanor Marsh. The charge was unlawful distribution of food in a public space, specifically Caldwell Park, in violation of Municipal Ordinance 18B, Section 4. First offense, misdemeanor. I looked at the file on my bench. Eleanor Marsh, 71 years old, retired schoolteacher, 42 years in the Providence public school system, now widowed, living on a fixed income, meaning she gets a set amount each month and it does not go up, in a small apartment on the east side of the city. Mrs. Marsh walked in slowly. She used a wooden cane with a small rubber tip at the bottom. Her coat was clean but old. It had small patches at the elbows where someone had carefully sewn the fabric back together. Her hair was white and neatly pinned. She wore no jewelry except a thin gold wedding band on her left hand. She looked at me with calm, kind eyes. Not scared, not angry, just steady. Like a woman who had spent decades standing in front of rooms full of restless children and had learned that peace comes from the inside. I greeted her gently. I told her she was in Providence Municipal Court, that I was Judge Frank Caprio, and that she had every right to speak for herself today. She nodded and said, "Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate that." Her voice was soft but clear, like a bell that had been rung 10,000 times and still held its tone. Then I looked at the other side of the courtroom. The man who had filed the formal complaint, the man who had pushed the city to press charges, was seated near the prosecutor's side of the room. His name was Derrick Holloway, 44 years old. He was a real estate developer. He owned 3 commercial buildings within 2 blocks of Caldwell Park, including a new luxury apartment complex called The Pinnacle that had opened just 8 months earlier. Units starting at $4,000 a month. Derrick Holloway was tall, broad-shouldered. He wore a charcoal gray suit with a pale blue tie. His shoes were polished to a shine you could almost see your reflection in. He had a lawyer sitting beside him, a younger man in an equally expensive suit who kept scribbling notes on a yellow legal pad. Holloway sat with his legs crossed, one arm draped over the back of his chair, like he was watching a show he had already paid for and fully expected to enjoy. The moment he looked at Mrs. Marsh, I saw it. Just a quick flicker, a look of contempt. That means deep disrespect, the kind that doesn't even try to hide itself. He looked at her the way some people look at a stain on a carpet, something to be cleaned up and forgotten. I began to read the complaint aloud. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning for the past 8 months, Eleanor Marsh had been arriving at Caldwell Park at 7 in the morning. She brought a large pot of hot soup, bread, fruit, and small cups of coffee. She served anyone who came, mostly homeless individuals. Some were veterans, some were elderly themselves, some were young people who had fallen through the cracks of a system that moves fast and catches very few. The complaint stated that this activity was, and I am reading directly, damaging property values, creating an undesirable visual environment, and discouraging prospective tenants from purchasing units in nearby residential developments. I set the file down. I looked at Holloway. I said, "Mr. Holloway, did you initiate this complaint?" He leaned forward slightly. "I did, Your Honor, and I stand by every word of it." His lawyer touched his arm. Holloway shrugged him off. I asked him calmly, "And your concern is primarily financial, related to your properties?" He smiled. It was not a warm smile. "Your Honor, I invested $40 million in that neighborhood. I have a right to protect that investment. What this woman is doing attracts the wrong element." The wrong element, 2 words, hanging in the air of my courtroom like smoke. I saw Mrs. Marsh close her eyes for just 1 second. Her hand tightened slightly on the top of her cane. Then she opened her eyes and looked straight ahead again. I said, "Mr. Holloway, the people Mrs. Marsh was serving, are they not residents of this city as well?" He uncrossed his legs and leaned forward. "With respect, Your Honor, not the kind that contribute anything." I heard someone in the gallery draw a sharp breath. I gave Holloway a calm, direct look. "I would caution you to choose your words carefully in my courtroom, Mr. Holloway." He sat back. His lawyer whispered something to him. Holloway gave a small, unbothered shrug. "Now, before I tell you what came next, I want to stop for just a moment, because this is the part of the story where the truth starts coming out. And the truth in this case was not what anyone in that room expected. If this story is gripping you right now, if you can feel that slow fire building in your chest, drop a like on this video, because what I am about to share next is going to change the entire shape of this case, and you do not want to scroll past it. Evidence was presented in 3 parts. The first piece of evidence came from the city's own Parks and Recreation Department. Their record showed that Caldwell Park had no standing ordinance against organized food service at the time Mrs. Marsh began her Tuesday and Thursday visits. The ordinance that Holloway cited, Municipal Ordinance 18B, Section 4, had been added to the books just 11 weeks ago. The city council vote that passed it had been attended and publicly supported by one Derrick Holloway, who had also made a campaign contribution of $12,000 to 3 of the 5 council members who voted yes within 60 days of that vote. I looked up from the file. "Mr. Holloway, were you aware of this timeline?" "I was involved in the community process, yes," he said smoothly. "That's called civic engagement, Your Honor." His lawyer was scribbling furiously now. The second piece of evidence was a series of text messages. They had been submitted by a former employee of Holloway's development company, a young woman named Priya Sandoval, who had resigned 4 months earlier and kept records she described as her conscience file. The messages were between Holloway and a contact listed as City Guy in his phone. One message, sent 6 months ago, read, "Need the park cleaned up before the Q3 open house. Can we make the soup lady situation a formal citation? She's a PR problem." The response read, "Working on it. Give it 60 days. The ordinance passed 58 days later. The courtroom was very quiet. I read both messages aloud, slowly, word for word. Holloway's jaw tightened. For the first time, his easy confidence cracked just slightly at the edges. "Those messages are taken out of context," he said. His voice was still controlled, but the warmth had drained out of it. I said, "Mr. Holloway, what context would make those words appropriate?" He said nothing. The third piece of evidence was a video. It had been recorded on a cell phone by a man named Curtis Webb, a 47-year-old veteran who had been receiving meals from Mrs. Marsh for 6 months. He was not in the courtroom that day, but he had submitted a recorded statement. My clerk played it on the courtroom monitor. Curtis Webb was a big man, broad face, steady voice. He was missing 2 fingers on his right hand. He looked directly into the camera and said, "I served 2 tours. I came home with nothing working right, not my body, not my mind. I lived in that park for 14 months. Mrs. Marsh never asked me my name before she handed me soup. She never asked me what I did wrong or why I was there. She just said good morning and filled my cup. That soup kept me here when I didn't want to be here anymore. I don't know what law she broke, but I know what she saved." The video ended. I do not mind telling you, in 30 years on this bench, I have heard thousands of statements. I have heard confessions and denials and excuses and pleas. Very few things have stopped the room the way those last two sentences did. Curtis Webb's words landed like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples went all the way to the back wall. And then Derrick Holloway ruined the silence. He leaned toward his lawyer and said it just loud enough for the front rows to hear. He did not mean for me to hear it, but I did. And so did Bailiff Okafor, and so did the court reporter, and so did every person in the first 3 rows of the gallery. He said, "A homeless vet playing the sad card. Classic. Your Honor, with all due respect, sentimentality is not a legal defense. She broke the law, a law that exists. Fine her and let's all go home. Some of us have actual business to conduct." 10 seconds. That is how long my courtroom stayed completely silent after those words. 10 full seconds where nobody breathed too loud. Nobody shifted in their seat. The court reporter's fingers stopped moving. Bailiff Okafor turned and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. And in those 10 seconds, I felt something I always feel when a person reveals exactly who they are in open court. Not anger, clarity. The gallery stirred. A woman near the back said quietly but clearly, "Lord, have mercy." A man 2 rows ahead of her shook his head slowly. Mrs. Marsh sat perfectly still. She did not look at Holloway. She looked at me. And she gave me the smallest nod. Like she had known all along. Like she had seen this kind of person before. Standing at a school board meeting or a city council session, deciding who deserved what and who got nothing. Now, Cho, if you're watching this and you believe that no amount of money gives any person the right to call a veteran's pain a card to be played, then subscribe right now. Join the people who believe every human being deserves to be seen. Because what I say next to Mr. Derrick Holloway is something I have been preparing for 30 years on this bench. I set down my pen. I folded my hands on the bench. I looked at Derrick Holloway for a long moment before I spoke. "Mr. Holloway," I said, "I want you to listen to me very carefully, not as a developer, not as a taxpayer, as a human being." He met my eyes. His expression was guarded now. The easy smile was completely gone. "Mr. Holloway, you came into this court today to prosecute a 71-year-old woman who wakes up before sunrise twice a week to cook hot food on a fixed income and carry it to people who have nothing. You spent money, time, and political influence to make what she was doing illegal. And when a man who slept on the ground in a public park told you what her soup meant to his survival, your response was to call it a performance." I paused. "Mr. Holloway, I am going to ask you something, and I want you to think before you answer. What did you do this morning before you came to court? Not your assistant, not your driver, you. What did you do with your own hands this morning that made someone else's life better?" He said nothing. His lawyer's pen had stopped moving. "You used the word element, Mr. Holloway. You called human beings who are struggling an element. Do you know what that word means when you use it that way? It means you have stopped seeing people. You see problems. You see obstacles. You see things that affect your property value. But you have stopped seeing people." I let that sit for a moment. "Mrs. Marsh sees people, Mr. Holloway. That is the difference between the two of you in this courtroom today. And it matters. It matters more than any amount of square footage or quarterly earnings ever could. You said, and I wrote it down, some of us have actual business to conduct. I want you to understand something. What this woman was doing, feeding hungry people, showing up consistently, asking nothing in return, that is the most actual business any human being can conduct on this earth." I looked at Mrs. Marsh now. "Mrs. Marsh, I want you to know that this court sees you. This court honors what you have done, and this court does not intend to punish you for it." She pressed her lips together. Her eyes grew bright. She nodded once. Then I looked back at Holloway. "Now, let us talk about what this court does intend to do." I turned to the full record before me. "Mr. Holloway, the evidence presented today demonstrates a coordinated effort to use municipal legislation as a personal business tool. The text messages entered into evidence suggest that a city ordinance was influenced by private financial interest. That is a serious matter that goes beyond the scope of this courtroom today. I am formally referring those communications to the Office of the Municipal Ethics Commission for full review. That review will determine whether additional legal proceedings are warranted. His lawyer stood up. Your Honor, my client. You will have your turn, I said. He sat back down. He sat back. Additionally, Mr. Holloway, your behavior in this courtroom today has been consistently disrespectful to this court, to the defendant, and to the memory and dignity of those you dismissed. I am finding you in contempt of court for your remarks regarding the veteran's statement. Bailiff Okafor. Okafor moved forward. Holloway stood up fast. You cannot be serious, he said. I am always serious in this courtroom, Mr. Holloway. I nodded to Okafor. The handcuffs came out. Holloway's face went pale. His lawyer was on his feet again, talking quickly, but I had already made my decision. Holloway stood very still as the cuffs clicked into place. The sound of them in a quiet courtroom is something people never forget. It is not loud, but it lands. He was taken to the holding area. I set a review hearing for 48 hours later and made clear that release would be contingent on a full written statement of conduct expectations and a personal apology submitted to the court. Beyond the contempt holding, I ordered the following. Derrick Holloway was required to pay a civil fine of $25,000. That money was to be directed entirely to Providence Family Services, a local nonprofit that provides meals, shelter referrals, and transitional housing support to unhoused residents of the city. He was required to personally volunteer, not send a check, not send a representative, at a Providence area food kitchen for a minimum of 120 hours over the following 6 months. The schedule was to be verified and signed off monthly by the kitchen's director and submitted directly to this court. He was required to attend a 2-session community impact seminar hosted by the city's Office of Housing and Human Services. The seminar specifically covers the economic and social causes of homelessness and the lived experiences of those affected. He was required to submit a handwritten letter of apology, not typed, not drafted by his lawyer, to Mrs. Eleanor Marsh to be reviewed by this court before delivery, and a separate handwritten letter acknowledging the dignity and service of veterans like Curtis Webb to be delivered to the Providence Veterans Outreach Center. Finally, as a condition of avoiding further legal escalation related to the ethics referral, Mr. Holloway's company was required to provide pro bono use of one currently vacant ground floor commercial space in one of his Caldwell area properties for a period of no less than 12 months to be used by a court-approved nonprofit for community services. Mrs. Marsh's meal program was offered the first right to use that space. As for Mrs. Marsh, all charges were dismissed, fully, completely, with a notation in the record that her conduct had demonstrated consistent community service and that the ordinance under which she had been cited was now under ethics review. She stood up slowly, steadying herself with her cane. She looked at me and said, "Thank you, Judge." I said, "Thank you, Mrs. Marsh. Don't stop cooking." The gallery responded with something you do not often hear in a courtroom. It started quietly, a few hands, then more. By the time Mrs. Marsh had taken 3 steps toward the door, the entire gallery was on its feet. I let it happen. Some moments deserve to breathe. 6 months later, I received a report from the Providence Family Services office. Derrick Holloway had completed 90 of his required 120 volunteer hours. He had not missed a single scheduled shift. The kitchen director wrote that he had arrived on time each week and had not complained once. She also noted carefully that in the final month he had begun showing up 15 minutes early. The handwritten letters were submitted to the court and reviewed. They were genuine. They were not perfect, but they were genuine, and sometimes that is enough to start with. The commercial space was made available to a coalition that included Mrs. Marsh's meal program. By the following spring, that space was serving hot breakfast 5 days a week to more than 60 people a day. Mrs. Marsh was there every Tuesday and Thursday, same as always. Except now, she had a building with a roof over her head and a proper kitchen sink. I heard she hung a small photograph of her late husband on the wall above the serving counter, just so he could see what she had built. I think about this case on quiet mornings. I think about what it means when we decide, as individuals, as a city, as a society, who deserves to take up space. Every person who walks into my courtroom is a whole life, a whole history, a whole set of moments that brought them to that room on that day. My job is not to sort people into worth and worthless. My job is to hold a line that says, in this room, everyone is seen. Derrick Holloway came into that courtroom believing that wealth gave him the authority to erase people. He left having learned that the law does not work that way. Not in my courtroom, not while I am sitting on this bench. And Eleanor Marsh came in wearing a patched coat, carrying a cane, and facing a charge that should never have existed. She left with her dignity intact, her record clean, and the knowledge that 30 years of showing up for her students, for her community, for strangers with empty bowls, had been witnessed and honored. The law is a tool. It can be used to build walls or to tear them down. What I hope every person who was in that courtroom remembered, what I hope you remember, is that justice is not about who has the most. It is about whether we are willing to see each other clearly, even when it costs us something. Feed people when you can. Show up when it matters. And never ever let anyone tell you that kindness is a public nuisance. That is all the law I have ever needed.